Welcome to the second video on hypothesis testing. If you recall from the first video, we have 3 questions that need to be answered. Are the cupcakes on sale at the bakery smaller than usual? Can a petrol additive improve the car engine efficiency? Is there any difference in the effectiveness of 2 types of cancer treatment? Now, these questions can be addressed through statistical hypothesis testing, which is a decision-making process for evaluating claims about a population. So today, we will be discussing the steps in hypothesis testing, and I will be using a mind map to summarize our discussion. Now, there are 5 systematic steps to facilitate a hypothesis testing procedure. The first step is to set the hypothesis. Now, every hypothesis testing situation begins with a statement of a hypothesis. There are 2 types of statistical hypothesis for each situation, which is the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. The symbol that we use for the null hypothesis is H0, which states that the population parameter is equal to a certain value, and the null hypothesis is usually the initial claim that researchers specify using previous research or knowledge. The alternative hypothesis, which is symbolized by H1, states that the population parameter is different than the value of the population parameter in the null hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis is what you might believe to be true, or the one that you hope to prove true. So the symbol that we will be using for null hypothesis will always be equal, whereas the alternative hypothesis will be using a symbol either not equal, greater than, or less than. For example, in the case of the cupcakes, what is the usual size of the cupcakes? Well, the bakery owner claims that it should be 90 grams. Therefore, we can state the null hypothesis this way, where mu stands for the average weight of all cupcakes and it is equal to 90. And the alternative hypothesis can be written this way, where the average weight of all cupcakes are actually, we claim that it is less than 90 grams. So we will write the symbol less than because we are interested to see if the cupcakes are smaller than the usual size. When we are testing something to be less than, it is called a one-tailed test, or you can also say it as one-sided test. You will see more examples later. However, if you are testing if the cupcakes are not the usual size, which means sometimes the cupcake seems to be smaller and sometimes they look bigger, then the alternative hypothesis would be written as not equal to 90. And because we are not specifying whether it is less than or more than, then we call this a two-tailed test or two-sided test. Now don't worry, all this will make sense when you actually perform the test later. Now in this video, I'm just explaining to you the general step. Okay, the general steps in hypothesis testing. Okay, moving on to the second step. Now, after stating the hypothesis, we need to choose an appropriate level of significance, which is called alpha. Now, what is alpha? Alpha is the level of significance, which is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is actually true. We also call it the level of risk. Okay, in order to perform the test, we need to collect data from samples. And when we use sample to infer for the population, we are prone to make mistakes. Okay, we cannot avoid making mistakes. Therefore, we need to set the limit of the chance of making the mistake. So that's why we need to specify the value of alpha, which is, it's like the probability that you will make a mistake in your decision. Okay, and the most common value used in most research is 0.05. In a way, you can see that when you choose alpha to be 0.05, you are 95% confident about your conclusion later. In SPSS, the value for alpha is determined by the confidence interval that we choose. For example, 99% confidence interval is equivalent to 0.01 level of significance, and 95% confidence interval is equivalent to 0.05 level of significance. Okay, the third step. The third step is to compute the p-value. But before we can calculate the p-value, we need to identify the type of statistical test that we will be using. The test that we will be discussing here is only t-test. Now, there are actually other tests, chi-square test, z-test, regression test, and so on. And the one that we will be discussing here is t-test. There are three types that you will learn. That is one sample test for the cupcake example, paired sample test for the car engine efficiency comparison test, and the independent sample test is for the two types of cancer treatment. The details will be discussed in the next video. Okay, p-value is obtained using the data from the sample that you collect. You will key in the data into SPSS, maybe 5, 7, 9, 6, 1, 4, and so on. And once everything is correctly checked, press OK and voila, p-value will appear, just like that. Okay? We will not be discussing the detail about the calculation for the p-value, because in your case, the value will be processed entirely using SPSS. You don't have to know the formula, right? And in SPSS, the p-value is calculated for two-tailed tests by default. Therefore, in the case that your test is actually one tail, the p-value will be divided by 2. Well, you will see the example later. Okay, step number 4 is about the decision rule. The decision rule is based on the comparison of alpha and p-value. Okay, when the p-value is smaller than the value of alpha, the null hypothesis can be rejected. Briefly, you can say when p is low, null has to go. Okay, it's like a song that you can sing. Alright. Okay, so this is the decision rule that we will be using for all hypothesis tests. Okay, we will make comparison between the p-value and alpha in order to reject or not reject the null hypothesis. Remember, from the very beginning, our aim in this hypothesis test is to find evidence so that we can reject the null hypothesis. We want to reject the claim that the cupcakes are 90 grams because we believe that the cupcakes are smaller, meaning the weight is below than the usual size of 90 grams. Okay, step number 5. This is the final step where you make decision and conclusion. Okay, so when the null hypothesis is rejected because the p-value was less than alpha, then we can conclude that we have enough evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. For example, we can say that we have enough evidence that the cupcake were smaller than usual. And when the null hypothesis is not rejected because p-value was larger than alpha, then we can conclude that we do not have enough evidence to support the alternative hypothesis. For example, we can say that we do not have enough evidence that the cupcakes are smaller than the usual size. So in summary, the first step in a hypothesis test is to write down the null and the alternative hypothesis. After that, you decide on the level of significance and then calculate the p-value using SPSS. Next step is to compare the p-value and alpha to see which one is bigger, and after that you make the conclusion. So those are the 5 steps in hypothesis test. As I said before, all these will make sense when you see the examples in the next videos. So I hope you enjoy the cupcakes. Now, the reason why it is now compulsory.